Hi, I'm John from the Christian Century, and I'm joined today by one of my colleagues at the magazine, Christian Century Associate Editor Jessica Mesman. Jessica recently wrote a cover story for our May issue about tarot cards and their illustrator, Pamela Colman Smith. So we're going to be talking a lot about that. But first, Jessica, hello, welcome. Thanks for chatting today.
Hi, great to chat with you.
Awesome. Before we dive into the actual article, a lot of our readers may not know what an editor does, what an associate editor does. So, what is your role like? What do you do at the magazine? To quote the movie Office Space, what would you say you do here?
I love my job. It's a dream job. Just say that first. There's not many places where you just get to immerse yourself in obscure religion topics and writing all day long, every day. And that's what I do for fun. So to get to do it for my job is really a dream come true. So for the magazine, I research and write stories like this one we're going to talk about today about Pamela Colman Smith and the draw of tarot for spiritual seekers. And I also get to read submissions and choose stories for publication and work closely with writers on developing stories for publication, which is my other favorite thing in the world to do. And I compile and edit and write our seen and heard section. It used to be called Century Marks. It has been rebranded with our redesign as Seen and Heard, which is also so fun for me because I get to just read religion news and weird news all day long and select some of my favorite, most interesting stories for those. And the other editors do also contribute to that section. So it's really fun. It's kind of a portrait of the obsessive minds that work at the Century and what we're attracted to reading in the news. So if you approach the section that way, you get a look into our psychology as well.
Yeah, nice. And I will add the award-winning Seen and Heard section of the Christian Century. Congratulations on your recent
Thank you.
Associated Church Press Awards. Um, okay, so this article, this cover story, it's called "The Woman Behind Tarot's Strange Beauty." And in the very beginning of the piece, you talk about the recent growth in popularity of tarot among Christians, Christian adjacent people, seekers,
Mhm.
lapsed Catholics, ex-evangelicals, and you kind of situate it in one of many fads, the things that are helping people kind of try to find meaning through routine. You mentioned astrology, personality tests like the Enneagram. I'm curious what you've gotten into in these searches for meanings. Have you found some tools or activities that you love other than tarot?
I am a dabbler. I'm a curious person, so I enjoy experiencing other religious practices and rituals. I've kind of never met a ritual I didn't enjoy. So, even from like, I'm not a sports fan, but I love going to baseball games because of just the ritual of um, watching the game. So, and eating a Chicago dog in the stands and singing at the seventh inning stretch. So all of that said, I don't feel like there's anything that has really drawn me in and become a regular practice for me. So I'm just kind of an equal opportunity dabbler. But I've done it all. I've done all the personality testing. I'm an ENFP. I'm an Enneagram 2. I'm a 2, the helper.
Yeah, that's two.
Yeah, I'm which was really surprising to me. I was really surprised I was on a 4. Anyway, I think that happens a lot. 2s want to be 4s, but they're not.
Interesting.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Steve. And I don't know. I have this problem where I don't take anything seriously enough to really get into it, which is why, as you read in the story, I've been told that I like my energies too low.
Mm.
I like you want to vibrate at a high level for this spiritual stuff, right? And I vibrate real low. So I make tarot readers mad and then they spritz me with rose water and try to get
I've
rid of.
never been to a tarot reader, but I'm certain I would be spritzed as well. So
Yeah, I mean, I love it, but I'm also one of those annoying people who wants to press it for more and more meaning and can't just accept it for what it is. And I don't know, because I don't think that I'm cynical, but I don't know. I don't know why I have such low energy. I've been trying to correct this for a really long time. So if you if you don't have if you have any advice for me, let me know.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind. For those following along at home too, in case there are any, I am an ENTJ and an Enneagram 3. I was mistyped as a 9 for a long time, and so we could have a whole other video where we just
I was
dive into the
also
Enneagram.
mistyped as a 9, so that's interesting.
Wow. Okay.
We have a lot to talk about. We'll do this another time. Let's save it
Yeah,
for the podcast.
it sounds
Um,
good.
I was really, I've always been drawn to tarot, though. And not even so much for any sort of spiritual practice, but just because they're beautiful objects. And as a Catholic, growing up around a lot of beautiful spiritual objects with spiritual resonance, I think that's part of it. And the iconography of tarot is very interesting and rich and beautiful, but also they're a little bit scary to a child who grew up in the 80s during the Satanic Panic. So they were forbidden for sure. I wasn't allowed to have a tarot deck or a Ouija board or anything that smacked of the occult. So I think there was a little bit of curiosity there on my part to see, well, why were they forbidden? What's it all about? And then as more and more of my friends became interested in tarot and practicing tarot, and this really there was kind of a boom. I think these things come in cycles. They were really popular in the 70s, and then, they had another resurgence. So they've always been around in the background, but I definitely noticed a lot of my lapsed Catholic friends were becoming intrigued by the practice and developing their own practices and taking it really seriously. It wasn't just like a fun party trick like it used to be in grad school. I went to grad school in creative writing. So the poets were always into tarot and they'd come out at parties, right? And do tarot readings. But it seemed much more like a fun social thing to do and not a religious practice, which is what I was noticing among my friends. So I kind of wanted to understand why and what tarot was offering them. So that was part of the impetus to write the story. And also, I had always heard that the woman who designed the Rider-Waite tarot deck, which is, I think, the classic tarot deck and the one that most people think of when they think of tarot, Pamela Colman Smith, converted to Catholicism after designing that deck. And so I could never really find out more than that. Like the story seemed to just stop there and people seemed a little befuddled by it. So I found a scholar who has done a lot of work on Pamela Colman Smith, and I interviewed her and I read her book. And that's another big part of this story, is understanding why my lapsed Catholic friends were moving toward tarot, and somehow tarot moved Pamela Colman Smith closer into the Catholic Church. So these reverse patterns.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. People moving away from Catholicism, being drawn to a tool that perhaps led its own creator closer to Catholicism.
Yeah.
So in addition to her conversion later in life, your article touches on a lot of different fascinating little tidbits from her professional journey, her activism, a lot of different things. I'm just curious, was there something about her story that really drew you to her? It seemed like there's some admiration or fascination sort of came through in your piece. I'm just curious if you could talk a little more about your feelings about Coleman Smith.
I think I just found another story of someone who moved along the margins of a lot of movements, which is always interesting to me. People who kind of shape movements and don't get credit, especially women. And her story just seemed to speak to me about my own experience of working within the church for so much of my life, which is really funny because she was working in occult circles, but seeing the same patterns play out powerful men, wonderful, creative, interesting women trying to work within the existing power structures, and getting burned by it over and over again. So this was a repeated pattern in her life. And that was interesting to me. Also interesting to me that she would leave the occult circles for Roman Catholic circles, which, you know, I don't even think I have to say it, but the gender dynamics, finding out that the gender dynamics of occult England were no less fraught than those of Roman Catholicism, but that's where she ended up taking care of aging priests as she grew older too. So I think she was always looking for her place within these movements and not finding home there. And
Yeah.
I just love this image of her when she died. I think they found her Bible, and she was still doodling her tarot images in the margins, and that just kind of beautiful synthesis of her own spiritual belief and growth, and where she ended up. It's a little bit mysterious. We don't know much more about it than that, but
Yeah.
it's beautiful
Well,
to me.
I thought your piece did a really good job taking us on a little bit of that journey that she went on without pretending like we have the real answers for why she
Yeah, and you know,
did
a
what she
lot of
did.
that was inspired by our own Amy Frickholm and her commitment to searching, even
Mm.
when you don't always end up with an answer, that there's something powerful about going on the search, going on the journey and the pilgrimage and asking the question. And I learned a lot about Pamela Colman Smith, but also about about my own spirituality and what I'm yearning for, what I'm searching for, by looking into all of these strange and fringe practices and what they've meant to women.
Wow.
So tarot is hardly fringe anymore. I mean, you can get tarot
Hmm.
cards at Five Below and a tarot card t-shirt at J. Crew.
Well, officially not fringe when it's available at Five Below.
Right. So it's mainstream at this point, but it was fascinating to discover that tarot and occult practice has always been closely tied with activist politics and feminist movements. And Pamela Colman Smith was really at the intersection of that. She was a suffragist. She designed suffragist posters that look like her tarot cards. So it's fascinating to see, because I think that is one of my guiding questions going into this story was, what's the connection between this sort of mass exodus of women from the Catholic Church that I was seeing after the election of Trump and all the events of 2016. All of those things kind of coincided, and I realized that a lot of the activist politics were connected to finding new ways of having spirituality outside of whatever structures women were feeling like were preventing them from making progress. So
Wow.
seeing those cycles repeat again and again throughout our history is really
Mhm.
interesting.
Yeah. Well, okay, finally, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned a couple personal experiences with tarot in the article, one reading that you received, and then another where someone spritzed you with rose water. I'm curious if you have any other just fun or meaningful experiences with tarot that maybe didn't make the cut that you would want to share, maybe a bonus story here for us.
I mean, I've done a lot of these things. Like every time I go home to New Orleans, I get a reading. Some have been uncanny and unnerving. Some have been really moving and beautiful, and some have just been absurd, like the one where the guy spritzed me with rose water, like pelted me with rose quartz because my energy was vibrating so low. I wanted to see if we could create a tarot experience now, because I think a lot of people maybe who will watch this have never done it or don't really know how it works or what it does. I'm not an expert tarot reader. I would never, but that's part of what I discovered also in researching and writing about this is that it's just a very personal tool. So you don't have to go to a professional reader. You don't have to, it's really about the best description I think I've heard of it so far is it's kind of like Schrodinger's cat. Like it all depends on whether or not you open the box. So whoever's approaching the cards, it's what you're bringing to it. You know, you don't have to think of it as magic or divination, or it's just a tool. And so the story that the card might tell is all dependent on you looking at the card. But we could talk more about whether that's magic or not.
Okay,
So,
well,
okay.
you've convinced me, because if nothing else can draw me into something, a theoretical physics thought experiment like Schrodinger's
It
cat
is.
can. So,
And I would love to write more about theoretical physics and tarot. So I pulled a card for myself before our interview, and I got the Queen of Pentacles. So literally all I do is go to my little booklet, which comes with your card and has a description of what that card means. Okay, so we've got, she's part of the Lesser Arcana. Well, why can't I find her now?
I can't wait for, while you're looking that up, I can't wait for the comments to pour in on this video. Christian Century officially, embraces witchcraft.
I know. So this is the description of Queen of Pentacles. The face suggests a woman whose qualities might be summed up by the idea of greatness of soul. She also has the cast of intelligence, contemplates her symbol, and may see the worlds within.
You pulled this card for yourself. How convenient. Greatness of soul and intelligence.
Right? I swear it just was the card that I pulled, but I felt very, it made me feel so confident. I was like, wow, okay, I'll take it. So now I'm going to pull a card for John, and we're going to see where it goes.
Okay.
All right. So you just need to, I've been just meditating on your energy. All right, let's see.
I'm excited.
Pull from the middle of the deck. Oh, you got the moon. Okay.
Okay.
And so can you see the card?
Yeah, that's a nice illustration.
All right. So is there anything in that illustration that like jumps out at you that you really like, or that means anything, or reminds you of something?
Well, I mean, I'm drawn to the face in the moon, and I'm trying to puzzle out what emotion might be captured there from that little person in the moon. In the moon, it looks more like a sun, but I'm assuming it's a moon since the card is called the moon.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see what our Rider-Waite tarot deck says about the moon. Wait, I thought the moon was major arcana. There it is. Okay. Hidden enemies, danger, calumny, darkness, terror, deception, and error. John. Now, if it's upside down, if the card had been pulled this way, you would want to think about instability, inconstancy, silence, and lesser degrees of deception and error. So that's just,
hidden enemies. What could be more intriguing for this live reading, live to us anyway, than hidden enemies? I'll have to ponder.
And my greatness of soul. This worked out great for us.
No, it worked out great for one of us. Yeah.
It's an interesting way of thinking about the story of your life. That's kind of how it's kind of Jungian. You've got your archetypes.
I think it's cool. I mean, I appreciate that. I'll go look up the moon and I'll think about it some more.
And I mean, that's a very basic. I know I have lots of friends who just draw a card for their day and then meditate and think about, well, what are these themes? What have they meant in my life? What can I do with this? And that's just a very straightforward practice. There are other people who do very complicated draws and have a much deeper understanding of the symbolism and the spiritual aspects of it. And I don't want to denigrate that practice in any way by my silly, superficial drawing here, but I just want to give people a sense of all the different ways you can approach it and that it really isn't scary, and that a lot of Pamela Colman Smith's vocabulary and visual vocabulary came from Christianity, and you're going to recognize a lot of the symbols in the cards from Christian symbolism. And Arthur Waite, who she worked with, that's where the Waite and Rider-Waite comes from, was an occultist, but was also deeply knowledgeable about Christianity. I think he was a Christian occultist. I know his mother was Catholic. So they were drawing from a lot of the same vocabulary and understandings that we will recognize. So that history is really fascinating to me. And there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah. Well, thank you for my first tarot experience here on YouTube. For those of you out there who didn't get a chance yet to read Jessica's article, the link for that will be below in the video description, along with some bonus links. We'll have a link for the book that Jessica was mentioning that she used in writing this article, a biography of Pamela Colman Smith by Elizabeth Foley O'Connor. We'll also have the link to the podcast In Search Of by our colleague Amy Frickholm, which apparently was inspiring to you as well.
Yes, it was.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for talking about this today, Jessica.
Yeah, thanks for having me.